Alongside the celebrated Māori leaders and warriors of our history, there exists another group of remarkable men and women. They were visionary and courageous and led Māori through times of massive upheaval in Aotearoa. In this series, we'll journey through the epic stories of the prophets of our people. What were their messages and visions? Did their prophecies come to pass? Do their words still have impact today? Will they guide us tomorrow?
In 1868, Pākehā settler society was thrown into further fear and uncertainty by the rise of a new Māori military resistance. The leader of this resistance came from a deep and powerful Māori worldview. Yet he would also challenge Māori society and Māori leadership. His name was Te Kooti Arikirangi.
Before the arrival of British explorer James Cook in New Zealand, a tohunga called Te Toiroa living at Mahe Peninsula had two prophecies. One was the arrival of Pākehā, the other was the rise of a man called Te Arikirangi. Te Kooti Arikirangi was born into the East Coast tribes of Rongowhakata and Ngāti Maru around 1832. He was immersed in the tikanga of his people and also well schooled by missionaries like William Williams. He was baptized in 1852. As a young man, and after disagreement with the church, he entered a period of lawlessness that worried his elders. He had an eye for the ladies and did well in the shipping business by undercutting the opposition, gaining him influential enemies, both Māori and Pākehā. In 1865, many of Te Kooti's people converted to the new religion, Pai Mārire. Te Kooti would not join them. Pai Mārire's spiritual leader, Te Hone Kaa, had preached peace, whilst some of his followers had run militant campaigns further up the coast. The people of Tūranga were dragged into the conflict. Those faithful to the Pai Mārire, or Ho-Ho as it became known, battled those who didn't agree with Te Ua's teachings. The colonial forces aligned themselves with those fighting against Pai Mārire.
The message they put out to Pātara, the Taranaki leader who was bringing the Ho-Ho message around to our area, stay out of Ngāti Porou territory. We see this religion as one that destroys people, obstructs us from praying to our own God, the God Almighty, and is here to destroy our faith.
Whilst fighting for the crown, Te Kooti had been accused of supplying powder to a Pai Mārire pā, Wairingahika, where his brother was encamped. Nothing could be proven and he was released. In early 1866, Governor George Grey captured the prophet Te Hone Kaa. He resolved to crush any remaining Pai Mārire resistance and therefore clear the way for taking of land. He outlawed the religion, branding all its faithful followers as rebels. Te Kooti was caught up in Grey's illegal scheming. He was arrested as a Ho-Ho spy, and despite his protests of innocence, he was deported with the Pai Mārire faithful to imprisonment on Whare Kauri, the Chathams. Prison life was hard on the Chathams, and Te Kooti suffered from acute fevers. In 1867, he began to have visions. He saw a lizard in a fire and used a flame which did not burn. Biblical and Māori visions of death and transformation. He was guided by an archangel. He then held services nightly at the prison. Despite stretches in solitary confinement, he conducted his services in secret. Te Kooti used imagery familiar to the Pai Mārire faithful. For instance, the Pai Mārire symbol of the upraised hand, which was to become the name of his new faith, Ringatu. The flame was a tohu, a sign that represented the transformation of Te Kooti and his people. God had a purpose for them.
I think the idea of tohu as a divine symbol, communication to prophets, is central, absolutely central to prophecy. And so those become hallmarks, I guess, when you're looking at Māori prophets in terms of their story and the way that they communicate their calling and their activity, that are these things present? Have they had a sense of calling? Have they had a tohu from the divine? Did that reshape and reframe them and transform their thinking and set them on another path with another very specific message? So it's part and parcel of what prophets are.
On the 12th of May 1868, Te Kooti received the first of his visions of exodus and liberation. The 12th of each month would be a sacred day for his followers.
He was given 3 signs by God for their deliverance across the water. The first sign was that 2 ships will be anchored on the harbour at Waitangi. The second sign was the onset of rain, fog, heavy mist, and the third one was lightning and thunder.
On July the 4th, 1868, Te Kooti led a dramatic prison break. This was a bloodless coup on Te Kooti's strict orders, apart from one Chatham Island sergeant who was killed because of a personal grievance. 298 prisoners seized the schooner Rifleman and set off back to the North Island. On the 4th day at sea, the ship was becalmed, and Te Kooti declared that a sacrifice was needed. He had his uncle thrown overboard, and soon the winds returned.
I thought, I te ono o ngā haora I te ata, I tau mai ai the Rifleman ki konei, I te tekau o ngā rā o hura. No te tekau mārua, I no hoi rā tau ki konei ki te tuku whakamoemiti ki te atua, I tuwhera ai te paipera, ai whakahaere te ai te karakia tuatahi o te hahiringa tū ki konei. Tekau mārua o ngā rā o hurai, ko tahi mano warurau ono tekau mā iwa. Nā no te taunga mai ki konei, ai tutuki ai ngā poropititanga a te awhi a te atua, ngā tohu a te atua kia Te Kooti, te whakahoki mai tōna iwi, i te ana ki te iwi o I Harairea, I whakahokia e mohi, whakawhiti te moana, e mohi o tia nei ko te Red Sea. Ni te tonu e rā kōrero ki ngā kōrero o te Kraipituri, I te hoki mai o rātau ki konei.
Here at Whareongonga, in this wāhi tapu, in this sacred space, Te Kooti had arrived. God had delivered him and his people, had removed the obstacles from their pathway, and they had escaped the seemingly inescapable. Soon the first part of Toiroa's prophecy would be fulfilled, and Te Kooti would lead his people in giving thanks for their biblical deliverance. But soon, as they leave this space, the second part would come to fruition. The sword would appear, and Te Kooti's prophecies and visions would be tested in the fiery crucible of war. It was during the conflicts of the 1860s that one of New Zealand's best-known prophets, Te Kooti Arikirangi, rose to prominence. After deportation with the Paimarire faithful and imprisonment on the remote Chatham Islands, he escaped, and in July of 1868, Te Kooti and his growing group of followers began a long, arduous journey from Poverty Bay through the Urewera. He intended to get to King Tawhio, to state his case that he had the moral and spiritual right to be the true leader of Māori. They never made it to the king. Local magistrate Reginald Biggs ordered British forces to pursue them. Despite Te Kooti's attempts to avoid conflict, he was drawn into battle and defeated his pursuers 3 times. Te Kooti had reached a turning point. He sent a statement to the effect that if the government wanted a war, he would give it to them. The night of November the 10th, 1868 would profoundly alter the direction of Te Kooti's story. Around 54 men, women and children, including regional bigs, were killed at Matawhero during a night raid. 2 days later, Te Kooti seized local chief Paratene Pototi, who was implicated in his exile, and executed him.
Now, what happened at Matawhero is not revenge. It's not random killing. What happened at Matawhero is utu. There's a distinction between revenge and utu. Utu is Māori justice, something that was done. It wasn't random. The people who died at Matawhero were selected very carefully. The people who betrayed took his land, 800 acres of his land, and his house, his meeting house, was taken from him.
Ngāti Porou signed up in the pursuit of Te Kooti for two reasons. There were Māori killed at Matawhero when the raid happened here in 1868. Relatives of people in Ngāti Porou, so they were after utu, obviously. But also, there was a belief that to prevent confiscation in Ngāti Porou, the longer we were in the field for the Crown, the less chance that that would happen. And so they agreed to go in pursuit of Te Kooti for those two reasons, largely.
Rōpata Waha Waha and his peers were a mixture of old-school warriors who had known the earlier era of cannibalism and yet had adopted Ngāti Porou Christianity and its values. Te Kooti withdrew from Matawhero. A force from Ngāti Kahungunu and Ngāti Porou were moving up on him. He got as far as the Whare Kōpai stream where, encumbered with stock and women and children, he was besieged.
Well, this place is called Mākaritu, and this was the area where Te Kooti was caught up with, and all these people, they had camped over here. And when the attack came from the constabulary and the other Māoris that were fighting with the Crown, they had to make their escape across this river. And as you can see, the bank is quite high, so they had to jump down there and then make their way across. Our understanding and our beliefs are that a real massacre took place here, more than actually up on Ngatapa itself. The river here ran red with blood and right down and going over the falls. In fact, how a lot of the women especially were able to to escape, they actually made out they were dead in the river and floated down and let the river take them down to survive. But, you know, when you go from here and up onto that flat there and around the corner there, and then you'll see the trek that they had to go to Ngatapa. This is where Te Kooti was taking the people.
Waha Waha and the other pursuing tribes pinned Te Kooti down to the mountaintop fortress of Ngatapa. Despite a punishing siege, Te Kooti and a core of his followers escaped down sheer cliffs and fled away to safety. Again, as the other followers tried to escape, Waha Waha captured them. 130 men were executed. Te Kooti's escape from Ngatapa was the first of many to come. His capacity to get out of trouble became linked to his magnificent white horse, Pōkai Whenua. It became an image of freedom. He had an alternative vision about when he was meant to die. Although you go in pursuit of me, even with the governor, I will not be captured by you, nor will I be killed by you, and it will be simply through accident that I shall die.
You read accounts of Te Kooti in the Uraweras, and he no doubt was a skilled bushman, but he had with him women, children, as part of his force. How it was that Rōpata Waha Waha and his Ngāti Porou contingent, who were well-trained bushmen who had fought many years since 1865 on the East Coast, coming from one direction, Te Rangi Hui Nui, Major Kemp from Whanganui, from another direction, and then Te Arawa from a third direction. How they could not catch them, you've got to scratch your head. Why was that? And there is an oral tradition that Ngāti Porou were not trying that hard to catch him. It was more about a length of service in the field for the Crown. and it was more to do with preventing confiscation happening here.
This was clearly evident when Wahawaha, a key figure in the pursuit of Te Kooti, was offered payment for his pursuit. Wahawaha declined the reward, saying, "Take your money away. It was our fight, not yours." Te Kooti had started to become toxic. He was burning bridges, the list of his enemies was growing fast, and there was a price on his head. The prophet and his followers made a decision to find a place to hide, somewhere to regroup, both militarily and spiritually. He sought the wilderness in order to reflect on biblical psalms and to wait for the signs that would surely come. When Te Kooti and his Ringatū followers first sought refuge in the Urewera, there were a series of engagements as he sought men and arms. At first, Tūhoe did not accept Te Kooti with open arms. In time, a pact was made. He had the use of their land, and in return, he would be their spiritual leader. This agreement would have disastrous consequences for Tūhoe. For a city boy, this forest can be a dense, difficult, almost impenetrable place. But for Ngai Tūhoe, it was home. And for Te Kooti, it became home for his vision, a place of safety, a place where his people could come together and pursue his faith. However, by 1870, 1871, it also became a place of bitterness and of warfare, as Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Kahungunu and Aotearoa pursued Te Kooti, waging a scorched earth campaign, which would create grief for generations to come. The atrocities that occurred in this region were not repeated anywhere else. It was a scorched earth policy with executions and murder.
Well, it's well documented about the prophecy of Te Kooti, on how he came here, and when his horse shied at seeing this teko here, and then he came out with the prophecy about Ngāti Whare, your lands will be lost to foreigners, which was the crown. And all this thing on the prophecy it was the starting to the beginning to where we are this day.
Te Urewera was a battleground for competing sides in the battle for the future of Māoridom. The forces chasing Te Kooti were the emerging iwi-aligned groups, Te Arawa, Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Kahungunu. This was a struggle over rangatiratanga. On one side were iwi who had chosen to align with empire to maintain their own self-determination. On the other side were those who defined their sovereignty through prophetic visions to protect the land. Both sides sought the same ends, but offered different political and spiritual paths. The cost of the struggle was tragic for Tūhoe. After the conflict in Te Urewera came to an end, King Tawhio opened his doors to the prophet to offer him sanctuary. Te Kooti relocated from Tūhoe to the King Country and renounced warfare. His theology developed into one of pacifism. Te Kooti now had the space to shape his religion. Once pardoned and free to travel, Te Kooti visited former friends and former enemies. He opened Ringatū Whare and left prophecies in the form of songs and sayings for each place. Many were warnings that the people should be cautious. Te Kooti set quests and riddles for his followers. His intent was to keep the people's spirits active and alert to ever-changing circumstances.
Te Kooti was a carver, we have to remember that, and that really inflected everything that he did in terms of the way that the Ringatu Church operated and the way in which they celebrated their faith and being together as a people. And so what made Ringatu houses so special was that they decided at a time when meeting houses were just emerging, they're not an old phenomena, they were just emerging in the 1840s, 1850s. He decided to take that as a symbol of the Ringatu people and explore that. And so he influenced his supporters around the country, and he used it as a way of bringing the people together in a space which could merge the different functions of a community, the social function, the political function, and so forth.
Te Kooti lived there for many years, and it was our loyalty to him why he came back here, because he knew, I suppose you could say, we harboured him well, fed him well. With Te Kooti, I think we held a special place in his heart, Ngāti Whare, because we're only a small people, we're humble people, and even though we were trodden on, we were beaten and battered by many bigger tribes, Te Kooti came and stayed with us and looked after us. So when I o tātou mea ki ai, with respect, and for what he done for from our old people way back to where we are today. That's what we were told.
As he prophesied, I will not be captured by you, nor will I be killed by you, and it will be simply through accident that I shall die. Te Kooti was resting in the shade of a cart when it suddenly fell on top of him. He died of his injuries in 1893. His legacy lives on today within the Ringatu religion and its worshippers.
Te āhuatanga ki a Te Kooti. Ko te mahi I kōrero chātu ki a Te Kooti. Ko te huri I te iwi Māori. Ki te whakaneke, whakamua ki te iwi Māori. Ko tāna mahi ke puta mai te ao Māori I roto I te ao tawhito. Kia neke mai, kia tīmata te neke mai, a ki raro I te ao hou. Me he mea tātou e titiro ana ki nā poropiti, mai roto I te karaipiture, ko I āno ke te āhuatanga wā rātau kōrero, wā rātau kupu whakaari. Kei reira anō Te Kooti, e noho ana. Re kororia he mangaron ki nui te whenua whakaaro pai ki nā tāngata katoa mene. E tikāna, koe ni te kaupapa. Koe ni te taumata unā taumata katoa e te atua.
Ringatu teaching and ceremony is notable for its quiet simplicity, its gentleness, its sense of peace. But its existence is dependent on the Māori language. Te reo is considered a key way to maintain a spiritual worldview that is pure and undiluted.
Tētahi āhuatanga, he mea ka ngaro o koutou whenua, ka ngaro te wairua, ka hoki te iwi. Perana I ngā iwi o Iharaira, ne? Ka hoki ki te pūtake e ora ake ai e rā āhuatanga. So I think when our culture was threatened, the loss of our land, people turned to charismatic leaders to show them a way through, and we were very, very lucky to have those people lead us through.
As with Moses, Te Kooti's legacy was assured. He had led his people to freedom in the present and had given them a vision of a new future. For a decade of his life, he was embroiled in the wars of the times. His last 20 years were spent in the pursuit of peace. Subsequent Māori prophets were to take peace even further, and at greater cost. On the next episode of The Prophets, at Parihaka in Taranaki, two leaders, Tohu Kākahi and Te Whiti o Rongomai, resisted colonial injustice through peace.
They held firm and they showed such discipline and kept that issue alive. And if it takes for us to be heard by and to inspire nations overseas, then that's kei te pai.